Today, I will tell you how, on the happiest day that was supposed to belong to my daughter, I was humiliated in front of 150 guests. My son-in-law tore apart the gift I had made with my own hands and demanded the keys to my mansion as if it were his birthright. When I refused, he mocked me cruelly. I walked out in silence, dialed one number, and 20 minutes later, a man appeared at the entrance. When everyone saw who he was, they gasped in disbelief. Remember to like this video, subscribe, and join us in our Grandma Life Stories community, where every story reveals lessons of dignity, justice, and resilience. Share your thoughts in the comments because your voices matter. My name is Winona Clark. I am 68 years old, a widow for over 2 decades, and I have lived a quiet life in a mansion that once belonged to my parents. For years, I tended its garden, cooked my own meals, and kept every corner neat and warm with memory. I never flaunted wealth. In truth, most people believed I was frugal, perhaps even struggling. That illusion kept me safe. I never corrected them. To me, value never lived in jewels or cars, but in the memories we protect. On the day of my daughter Isabel's wedding, I wanted to give her something pure, something that would remind her of her roots. I spent weeks polishing an old wooden box I had carved with my father as a girl. Inside, I placed an album of photographs that spanned generations, black and white portraits of my grandparents, candid snapshots of Isabel as a child chasing butterflies, and even letters her late father had written before he passed. I tied the box with a silk ribbon, simple yet full of meaning. When the time came, I carried the box into the ballroom, lit with crystal chandeliers and filled with guests in glittering gowns. The music dimmed. I placed the gift on the head table. Isabel's hands trembled as she touched the ribbon. I saw in her eyes a glimmer of recognition, a small spark of the girl who once sat in my lap asking to hear stories of her father. But then Graham, her new husband, my son-in-law, snatched the box before she could open it. He was tall, sharply dressed, with eyes that never softened. He forced a grin for the crowd and raised his voice. An album? A box of old photos? We do not need antiques, Winona. We need your mansion. That would be a gift worthy of this wedding. Gasps echoed. The entire room stiffened. Isabel's face burned red. She lowered her eyes, ashamed yet silent. Graham opened the box and, with a deliberate motion, ripped the album in half. Pages fluttered to the ground, pictures of Isabel as a baby, letters from her father, scattered like fallen leaves on marble floors. My breath caught, but I held myself still. 150 faces stared at me, waiting for me to break. My voice was steady when I said, "The gift I gave is not for sale. It was never meant to be currency." Graham smirked, leaned forward, and spoke so the microphones carried his words through the ballroom. "You are an old woman living alone in a house far too large. That mansion should belong to us, to build our future. Hand over the keys tonight. Stop clinging to what you do not need." His words cut deeper than any blade. Guests whispered. Some shook their heads. Others pulled out their phones, recording every second. Isabel sat frozen, caught between loyalty to her husband and fear of me. I bent down and picked up one of the torn photographs. It was of Isabel at 5 years old, laughing in a field of daisies. My fingers trembled, but not from weakness. I slipped the photo into my pocket, lifted my chin, and met Graham's eyes. "You may tear paper," I said softly, "but you will never tear away the truth of who I am." Silence swept the room. For a heartbeat, even the violins at the corner table stopped. Graham sneered, turned to the guests, and declared, "See how unreasonable she is? She hides behind memories because she has nothing else to offer. Without us, this wedding would not even exist. My family paid for nearly everything." That was the lie. I could see Isabel's shoulders tighten at his words, for she knew deep down that the bills were never his to pay. Yet she said nothing. Her silence hurt more than his cruelty. I stood tall, my hands clasped before me, and whispered to myself, "Not tonight, not in front of them." The humiliation burned in my chest, but my pride held steady. The ballroom erupted again with murmurs, divided between disbelief and pity. Some watched me with sympathy, others with judgment. Graham basked in the attention, convinced he had won. But as I turned and walked away, every step deliberate, I felt a calm settle over me. I would not fight him there. I would not give him the spectacle he wanted. I would act with quiet precision. When I reached the marble steps outside, the night air struck my face, cool and sharp. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only number that mattered. My voice was steady, though my heart raced. "It is time," I said. I ended the call, slipped the phone into my purse, and straightened my shoulders. Behind me, the laughter of the ballroom spilled into the night, mocking and hollow. Yet I knew the tide had already begun to turn. Inside, Graham believed he had broken me. He believed an album was worthless, that dignity could be crushed with a torn ribbon and raised voice. He did not understand that by tearing apart my gift, he revealed more about himself than he ever wished to show, and I knew, before the night was over, he would discover the reality I had kept hidden all along. The laughter behind me was sharp and hollow, echoing through the ballroom even as I bent down and gathered the torn fragments of my gift. Pages of my daughter's childhood, the letters her father once wrote, scraps of memories that were never meant to be shredded for spectacle, now lay scattered across the polished floor. My fingers closed around one piece, and I slipped it into my purse, not because it could be repaired, but because I would not leave what was mine behind. I rose to my full height and turned toward the heavy glass doors. 150 faces still followed me, their whispers circling like vultures above the carcass of my dignity. Some looked at me with pity, others with morbid curiosity. None dared to speak out loud. Isabel's eyes did not meet mine. She sat pressed against Graham, her smile forced, her shoulders stiff, her silence deafening. He leaned close to her ear and whispered something that made her flinch, and then he raised his glass as if to toast his own cruelty. I walked away. My steps were deliberate, heels striking marble, each sound a reminder that I had not been broken. The air grew cooler as I reached the foyer. Beyond the double doors, the night waited for me, black and unflinching. I did not hesitate. I pushed through the doors, the chill hitting my skin with a sharpness that cleared my mind. The music still poured from inside, strings and drums clashing with the muffled laughter of those who thought themselves superior. Their celebration could not touch me anymore. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered for only a second before pressing a single contact. The line rang once, then his voice, steady, professional, the voice I had trusted for 20 years, came through. "Marcus Reed," he answered. "It's time," I said. My voice was low, but it did not waver. "Bring the documents. 20 minutes." There was no pause on his end, no surprise. "I will be there," he replied. That was all I needed. I ended the call without another word. The phone slid back into my purse as I turned toward the glass wall of the ballroom. From where I stood, I could see the crowd illuminated by chandeliers. Graham was in the center, chest puffed out, basking in the laughter of men who admired arrogance because it mirrored their own. Isabel sat rigid, her smile cracked like porcelain, and though she tried to hide it, her eyes darted nervously toward the door I had just exited. She knew I was not done. She knew I had never been the kind of woman to walk away without a plan. Guests leaned together in small groups, whispering as they pointed toward the torn album pages still scattered near the head table. Some lifted their phones to capture images, eager to feed gossip later. I let them. Their curiosity would soon turn to shock. I stepped away from the window and stood beneath the stone arch of the entryway. The shadows fell across my face, but inside my chest, a new fire had been lit. Graham thought he had humiliated me, but he had only revealed himself. His greed was no longer a secret whispered in corridors. It was public, documented by every camera in that room. He had done half my work for me. I inhaled deeply, the night air sharp with the scent of rain, and exhaled with a calm that surprised even me. My hands did not shake. My spine was straight. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of silence shift in my favor. I remembered Marcus's words to me months earlier when I first confided my suspicions. "You have the power, Winona. You just have to decide when to use it." Tonight was that moment. I reached again into my purse, not for my phone, but for the photograph I had rescued from the floor. It was Isabel, 5 years old, holding a daisy crown on her head, her father kneeling beside her with pride in his eyes. My thumb brushed over their faces. They deserved better than this farce of a marriage built on arrogance and debt. She deserved better, even if she could not see it yet. I placed the photo back carefully and straightened my shoulders. The ballroom doors opened briefly, spilling light and sound into the night, as another guest stepped outside for air. She glanced at me, eyes wide with curiosity, but I gave her nothing. She turned quickly away. That was good. Let them wonder. I walked down the steps, each one echoing into the darkness, and crossed the gravel path toward the parking lot. Headlights flickered in the distance, cars arriving late. I kept walking, the rhythm of my heels steady, unhurried. In 20 minutes, Marcus would arrive, carrying the documents I had guarded for years. Deeds, account statements, contracts, proof of everything I had built and everything I had protected. Proof that no one had paid for this wedding but me. Proof that Graham's boasts were lies. Proof that dignity was not for sale, no matter how loudly he demanded the keys to my life. I paused beneath a lamppost, the light casting my shadow long across the pavement. For a brief moment, I closed my eyes. Inside the ballroom, they celebrated a victory that would not last an hour. I stood outside in silence, already writing the next chapter. I whispered to myself, firm and cold, "Let them laugh. It will not last." And then I turned back toward the building, waiting for the headlights I knew would cut through the night, waiting for Marcus, waiting for the reckoning that would change everything. The night air pressed cool against my skin as I waited under the lamppost, but my mind refused to stay in the present. Memories surfaced uninvited, dragging me back to the very first evening Isabel had brought Graham to meet me. If I had listened more closely then, if I had paid sharper attention to the words tucked between his smiles, perhaps none of this would have surprised me. I remember the sound of Isabel's laugh in the hallway outside my apartment, bright and excited, the way a young woman laughs when she believes she has found someone to build a life with. I had opened the door before she could knock. I was too curious to see this man she had spoken of with such conviction. "Mom," she had said, her cheeks flushed, her eyes gleaming. "This is Graham Dawson." He stepped into my apartment with the kind of confidence that wasn't earned, but borrowed. His eyes swept the room like a scanner, not pausing on the photos of Isabel's childhood, not on the quilts I had sewn by hand, not on the shelf lined with books my husband and I once read together. Instead, he noted the sag in the couch cushions, the chipped paint on the window frames, the age of the appliances. "Cozy," he said finally, his lips curling into something that was neither smile nor compliment. "For a retiree." The word struck me harder than he intended. Retiree. I was 68, yes, but I was far from done. The flower shop kept me alive, kept me connected. Still, I forced a polite smile, the kind a host wears when she refuses to give offense. Inside, though, something twisted. His tone was too deliberate, the kind of half-joke that reveals more truth than humor. Isabel missed it, or perhaps she chose not to see it. She slid her arm through his, beaming as though his presence alone validated every dream she carried. "Isn't it nice, Graham? Mom keeps everything so warm and welcoming." He nodded vaguely, then leaned close to her ear. "You deserve something more than warm and welcoming. You deserve marble counters, vaulted ceilings, chandeliers." He spoke it loud enough for me to hear. My daughter giggled nervously, brushing his words away with a wave of her hand. "Oh, stop! Mom worked hard for this place." His eyes flicked back to me, and for a second I saw it, the calculation. Not admiration for Isabel's loyalty, but recognition of the fact that Isabel had been raised in this modest apartment, in this modest life, and he meant to take her out of it, whether through ambition or something darker. We sat down to dinner. I had prepared roast chicken with rosemary, potatoes baked in butter, and a salad tossed from the garden downstairs. Food I had always made with love. Isabel reached for the bread basket eagerly, but Graham only picked at his plate, pushing food around with his fork. "It's good," he said without looking up, then quickly added, "but Isabel's palate is wasted here. She's too bright, too sophisticated to stay stuck in this kind of routine. Don't you agree, Mrs. Clark?" The way he said my name, Mrs. Clark, not Winona, not Mom, was clipped, detached. I replied evenly, though my jaw tightened. "I believe my daughter is capable of making her own choices. She knows her worth without anyone else defining it." For a moment, silence. Then he laughed, a hollow sound that held no humor. "Of course. Still, she could have so much more." Throughout the evening, his pattern repeated itself. Every time he complimented Isabel, he laced it with a criticism of her current life. "You're brilliant, but you shouldn't waste your time teaching at that small community college. You deserve a university position." Or, "You're stunning, but why wear dresses from discount racks when you should be in designer?" His words were daggers disguised as roses, and Isabel accepted them as if they were bouquets. I watched, my heart sinking, as she flushed with pride each time he spoke. She did not hear the implication that she was not enough unless she climbed higher, unless she lived richer, unless she detached herself from the very roots that had nurtured her. At one point, Graham excused himself to take a call. Through the thin walls, I caught fragments of his voice. "Yes, her place. Prime location. Old, but valuable. Trust me, she won't see it coming." When he returned, his smile was intact, his eyes smooth as glass. Isabel didn't question why he'd stepped outside. She never did. Later, as I washed the dishes, Isabel slipped behind me, her voice low. "So, what do you think of him?" I could have said what I felt, that his charm was a mask, that his eyes never softened when they looked at her, that his ambition oozed from every syllable he spoke. But I only said, "He has strong opinions." She laughed lightly. "He's just passionate, Mom. He wants the best for me." Passionate. That was one word for it. Predatory was another. That night, after they left, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The silence was heavy. My fingers traced the rim of my teacup as I replayed his words. "Cozy for a retiree. You deserve marble. She deserves more." The truth was plain even then. Graham was not courting Isabel out of love alone. He was courting her future, her prospects, her inheritance. And though my daughter could not see it, I had seen men like him before. They always wore smiles, they always spoke of better, and they always left wreckage behind. Now, standing in the parking lot years later, I understood that evening for what it truly was. The beginning of the slow erosion, the first stone thrown at my dignity. He had marked me then, just as surely as he had tonight in front of 150 guests. The seeds of contempt had been sown long before, and they had taken root in every choice he made since. I tightened my grip on my purse and whispered into the night, I should have stopped it then. But I had not, and now I would not wait another day to correct the mistake. The first year I told myself to ignore it. Words could be brushed aside, I thought. But Graham had a talent for turning even the simplest moments into sharpened edges, and over 2 years, those edges cut deeper than I cared to admit. One evening we gathered for dinner at my apartment. Isabel had insisted, eager to show she hadn't forgotten her roots. I set the table with the china her father and I had bought decades earlier, polished so it gleamed under the warm light. I wore a soft blue dress, modest but comfortable, one I had always loved because it reminded me of summers when Isabel was a child. Graham sat down, glanced once at me, and smirked. "Tell me, Mrs. Clark, is that dress from the 70s or the 80s? Hard to tell." The fork in my hand paused just for a second. Isabel let out a brittle laugh, eyes darting between us, then quickly filled her glass with water. She did not defend me. She did not tell him it was unkind. Instead, she diverted the conversation to work, her voice strained but determined. I chewed my food slowly, forcing a smile that did not reach my eyes. I had endured worse, I reminded myself. A comment about a dress was nothing. But still, when I excused myself to bring dessert, I caught my reflection in the kitchen mirror. For the first time, I wondered if perhaps my clothes did make me look outdated. His words lingered like stains that water could not wash away. Another time we met outside a restaurant. Isabel had begged me to join them after work. I drove my 10-year-old sedan, the one that had never once failed me. As I parked across the street, Graham leaned against his glossy new car, arms folded. He whistled mockingly as I pulled up. "That thing still runs?" he asked loudly, so passers-by turned to look. "Looks like it should be in a junkyard. Honestly, Winona, it's dangerous. If you want, I can find someone to rent out your garage. At least then you'd be making money instead of clinging to that relic." I stepped out calmly, closing the door with deliberate care. "It runs well enough for me," I replied, meeting his gaze. He chuckled, shaking his head as if humoring a stubborn child. Isabel slipped her hand into his arm, whispering something I could not hear. He laughed again, louder this time, and pressed a kiss to her temple. She looked down at the pavement. It was always like this. Tiny cuts delivered with a smile, disguised as humor, each one followed by Isabel's silence. At family gatherings, he'd glance at my hands and say, "You still work at that flower shop? Most women your age are knitting, not hauling buckets of water." At holidays, when I brought homemade dishes, he'd push them aside and say, "Isabel deserves finer cuisine. Maybe one day we'll hire a chef." Every insult carried a double edge, one for me, one for Isabel. He framed me as outdated, irrelevant, a burden tethering her to a life below what she deserved. I learned to laugh thinly, to sip my tea as if nothing struck me, to store every word deep inside where no one could see. But alone at night, I felt the weight pressing heavier. My daughter, once my closest ally, had begun to look at me differently. Not cruelly, not yet, but with a kind of pity I could not bear. One Saturday she visited without Graham. We sat on the balcony, the city humming softly below. She spoke hesitantly, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "Mom, Graham just wants what's best for us. He pushes hard, I know, but he's right about some things. Maybe you shouldn't have to worry about keeping up this apartment alone." The words stung sharper than his insults. "Isabel," I said quietly, "this apartment is my home. Your father and I built our life here. I'm not a burden." She reached for my hand, squeezing gently. "I know, but times change. Times." Her eyes were tender, but I recognized the echo of his voice in them. She was beginning to believe. After she left, I sat in the stillness of the living room, surrounded by furniture Graham mocked, by photos he dismissed. The walls whispered every memory I had kept safe, yet suddenly I felt them shaking, as if someone outside was pushing against them, eager to take it all away. I began to understand then that his words were not careless. They were deliberate, a campaign disguised as banter. He wanted me small. He wanted Isabel to see me as fragile, outdated, incapable, and Isabel, caught between loyalty and love, was slipping toward his side. I smiled less at their visits, though I kept my composure. When he sneered at my shoes, I pretended not to hear. When he called my kitchen quaint, I poured more tea. But inside, a storm gathered. There is only so much silence a person can swallow before it turns bitter. His contempt was no longer hidden. And my daughter's silence was the bitterest cut of all. 2 years of mockery had worn grooves into my patience. With each comment, the water in the glass rose higher. And now, standing outside the ballroom tonight, I knew the glass was nearly full. It would not take much more before it spilled. It was 2 months before the wedding when the Dawsons revealed just how far they were willing to go. I had finished watering the plants on my balcony when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw not only Graham, but also his parents, Douglas and Elaine. Isabel stood slightly behind them, her face tense, her eyes downcast. My chest tightened. Something was coming. I opened the door and stepped aside. They filed in as if they owned the space, Douglas clutching a leather folder under his arm, Elaine scanning the apartment with her chin lifted high. Graham wore his usual smirk. Isabel avoided my gaze. Douglas wasted no time. He slapped the folder onto my coffee table, the sound sharp in the stillness of my living room. "These are the papers," he said. His voice was gravel, seasoned with bitterness. "It's time to sell the house. A property that size, in that location, should not be wasted on one woman. You could make millions, and we can ensure it goes to good use." I stared at the folder without touching it. "That house is mine," I said evenly. Elaine perched on the edge of my couch, smoothing her skirt with deliberate precision. "Winona, you must see reason. A woman your age living alone in a mansion. It is dangerous. Times have changed. The world is not safe. Better to move into a place with care, perhaps a retirement community. There is no shame in it. In fact, it would protect your dignity." Her words were honeyed, but her eyes glistened with something sharper. She was not worried for me. She was worried about appearances. I had heard whispers that Elaine grew up poor, her family scraping by in a trailer park. She had married Douglas to escape it, only to watch his businesses collapse one by one. Her fear of slipping back into poverty dripped from every syllable. Graham leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with satisfaction. "Mom is right. You should be thinking about the future, not clinging to the past. Isabel and I are about to start our life together. We need that house more than you do." Finally, Isabel spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, maybe it is something to consider." Her words cut deeper than any of theirs. She would not meet my eyes. Her loyalty was trembling, shifting beneath the weight of Graham's influence. I let the silence sit heavy for a moment. I wanted them to feel the strength in it. Then I said, "That house is not a piece of property for you to divvy up at your convenience. It is not yours to plan for, not yours to demand. It is mine, and it will remain mine." Douglas sneered. "Stubbornness is a luxury you cannot afford. Do you think you can maintain that place forever? Roofs rot, pipes burst, taxes climb. You will not last." I met his eyes without flinching. "I have lasted longer than you realize. And unlike you, Douglas, I have never gambled away what was entrusted to me." His face hardened, the vein in his temple pulsing. Elaine shifted uncomfortably, but she recovered quickly, her voice smooth again. "We only mean to help. Think of Isabel. She should not have to choose between her mother and her husband. Make it easy for her. Sign the papers and we can all move forward." Graham smirked at that, his gaze sliding to Isabel, who twisted her hands in her lap. He thought he had her cornered. He thought I was the weak link. I rose from my chair, my hands steady, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Listen carefully. My house is not for sale. Not to you, not to anyone. You walk into my home, place papers on my table, and speak as if my life is already written. But you forget one thing. I am the one holding the pen." The room went still. Douglas's jaw tightened. Elaine's eyes flickered with embarrassment, and Graham's smirk faltered for just a moment. Isabel looked as though she might cry, but no tears came. Douglas finally snapped the folder shut, his voice low with venom. "You'll regret this. When the time comes, don't say we didn't give you a chance." They stood and filed out as quickly as they had entered, their unity a wall of hostility pressing against me even as they left my apartment. Isabel lingered at the door, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak, but Graham's hand on her back propelled her forward. The door closed behind them, and silence rushed in like a tide. I sat back down, my heart pounding not from fear, but from fury. For 2 years I had endured Graham's barbs, his contempt hidden beneath smirks and jokes. But this was different. This was no passing insult. This was a coordinated assault, a family united not by love, but by greed and fear. I looked at the table where the folder had sat, the impression of its weight still etched in the wood grain. I had not opened it, but I knew what was inside. Contracts designed to corner me, clauses crafted to strip me of ownership under the guise of care. I whispered to myself, steady and cold, "They will not break me." The pressure was mounting, yes. Their plan was bold, invasive, ruthless. But they had underestimated me. I had built my life on resilience, on quiet strength they could not fathom. They thought I was a frail woman standing alone against a family. They were wrong. In that moment, I resolved that no matter what came next, wedding, humiliation, or worse, I would not bend. The house was more than brick and stone. It was history, memory, dignity, and I would defend it with everything I had. The Dawsons left that night believing they had planted doubt. What they had truly planted was fire. I had lived long enough to know when something did not add up. Graham's arrogance, the way he flaunted wealth he had not earned, the pressure his family applied to strip me of my home, it all reeked of desperation. But instinct is not proof. I needed facts, something undeniable, something that would reveal the truth beneath the smirk. That was when I called Carla Nguyen. Carla and I had been friends for nearly 30 years. We met through the local business association when she was just beginning her career as a real estate broker. Sharp, diligent, and fiercely loyal. She was the kind of woman who always seemed to know more than she let on. I trusted her because, unlike most, she had never tried to use me for what I owned. When I reached out, she agreed immediately. "Give me a week," she said. "If there's dirt on him, I'll find it." 7 days later, she sat across from me at the small table in my kitchen. The leather folder she carried was thick, papers pressed together as if they had weight far beyond their size. She poured herself a cup of tea, took a slow sip, and met my eyes. "Winona," she began, her voice steady, "you were right to be suspicious." She opened the folder and slid the first page toward me. It was a credit report, the numbers screaming louder than words ever could. Graham's debts exceeded $100,000, spread across multiple credit cards. Every limit maxed out, every balance unpaid. The line items showed purchases from luxury retailers, extravagant restaurants, and travel agencies. "He financed that wedding with plastic," Carla said grimly. "Every flower arrangement, every champagne bottle, every rented luxury car, it all went on cards. Cards he has no intention of paying." I stared at the paper, bile rising in my throat. The lavish celebration Isabel had been so proud of was nothing but a mirage, bought with borrowed money. Carla turned another page. "There's more. He is facing a pending lawsuit from his former employer. They allege he falsified client accounts and diverted company funds. The total amount disputed is close to $50,000. If he loses, he could be barred from working in finance altogether." My hand trembled slightly as I traced the black letters on the page. "So he is not just careless, he is corrupt." Carla nodded. "Yes, and desperate. He has positioned himself as someone Isabel cannot live without, while all along he has been bleeding money. He needs an asset to fall back on. Your mansion, Winona, is his lifeline. He cannot survive without it." I pressed my palm against the cool surface of the table, grounding myself. My voice came low, bitter. So this was never about love. It was never about Isabel's happiness. It was a transaction, a purchase he intended to make with her as the bargaining chip. The words tasted like ash. I had wanted so badly to believe that, despite his arrogance, Graham might truly love my daughter, that perhaps his ambition was misguided, not malicious. But the documents in front of me burned that hope away. Carla leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You cannot let him near that house. If he gains any leverage, he will strip it from you and leave nothing behind. And Isabel, she will be trapped in the wreckage of his choices." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. He tore apart the album at the wedding, as if memories meant nothing. Now I see why. To him, nothing has value unless it can be sold. Carla reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "You are stronger than him. You have patience, wisdom, and assets he cannot touch unless you let him. Use that. Protect what is yours." I nodded slowly, feeling the sting of tears I refused to let fall. My chest ached with a mix of rage and sorrow. Rage at Graham for his manipulation, sorrow for Isabel, who could not yet see the man she had married for, who he truly was. I gathered the papers into a neat stack and slid them back into the folder. My voice was calm, though it carried the weight of steel. If Graham thinks this is a game of power, then he has underestimated me. I will not hand over my life to feed his debts, and when the truth comes out, it will not be me who stands humiliated. Carla's eyes glinted with approval. Then let's make sure the truth does come out. As she left that evening, I stood at the window watching her car disappear down the street. The folder lay heavy on my kitchen counter, a silent testament to the reality I could no longer ignore. I whispered into the quiet, the words tasting like iron on my tongue. This marriage was not built on love. It was built on debt, on lies, on hunger, and hunger will devour itself. The bitterness in my chest hardened into resolve. Graham believed he had cornered me, but he had only exposed his own weakness. Now I held the knowledge that could dismantle him. Now I understood that every cruel word, every demand for my house, every public humiliation was born not of strength, but of fear. And I promised myself that fear would consume him before it ever touched me. The night after Carla handed me the folder, I could not sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the hum of the city outside pressing faintly against the windows, but inside me there was only silence. Hard, heavy silence. My mind replayed every insult, every mocking smile, every attempt to corner me. They believed I was fragile, an old woman they could push until she broke. They forgot that age is not weakness, it is weapon. At 2 a.m, I rose and crossed the living room. The shadows stretched long across the floor. I bent down in front of the cabinet where my safe was hidden, its dial worn smooth from years of use. My fingers spun the combination slowly, each click echoing in the stillness. When the door opened, the cool metal air hit me like a reminder. This was not just paper. This was power. Inside were the documents that marked the legacy of my life. The deed to the mansion, its edges yellowed but strong. Contracts for the 2 rental properties I had quietly maintained for decades. Bank statements, certificates of investments made carefully, patiently. I spread them across the table, the paper whispering as though they too had been waiting for this night. I sat down, pulled a pen from the drawer, and wrote on a single sheet of notepaper. No more cover, no more silence. I placed the note above the deeds, my handwriting steady, each letter carved with intent. For years I had tolerated their contempt, thinking I could shield Isabel from the truth by carrying the burden myself. But truth ignored only grows sharper. Graham's greed was no longer private, his family's ambition no longer subtle. They had shown me exactly who they were, and now it was time to show them who I am. I called Marcus Reed at dawn. His voice was groggy, but alert the moment he heard mine. "Winona, what's happened?" "I'm ready," I told him. "We move everything out of reach. Every guarantee, every loose end, cut them off. I want the paperwork airtight before the wedding. I want no signature, no whisper of my name to be used against me." There was a pause, then his voice sharpened. "Understood. I'll prepare the cancellations. Powers of attorney, financial proxies, gone. They'll have no leverage. When do you want to sign?" "Tonight," I said. "Bring everything. I'm done waiting." All day, I moved with a calm that was almost frightening. I went through closets, pulling old files, checking statements. I sat at the desk where my late husband once handled our accounts, and I felt his presence steadying me. He had trusted me with our family's future, and I would not let that trust rot in the hands of parasites. By evening, Marcus arrived. He carried a briefcase stuffed with folders, his tie askew from the rush. He laid the documents across my table in neat rows. "Here," he said, tapping each stack. "Revocation of financial guarantees, termination of joint signatory rights, declaration of independence for all accounts. Once you sign these, Winona, no one but you has claim." I picked up the pen. My hand did not tremble. I signed my name again and again, the ink dark, final. With each signature, The knot in my chest loosened. When the last page was complete, Marcus leaned back, studying me. "They will not expect this. They think you're cornered. What's your next step?" I looked at him, my eyes cold. "I wait. They believe the wedding will end with me handing over keys. Instead, it will end with me handing them the truth." He nodded slowly, understanding more than my words revealed. "Then I'll be ready to stand with you." After he left, I gathered the signed documents and locked them in a fireproof case. I placed it back in the safe, spun the dial, and pressed my palm against the steel. This was not fear. This was preparation. I walked through the mansion that night, each room holding memories, each wall painted with years of love and loss. They thought it was just property. They had no idea what lived here. They wanted a house. I held a fortress. Standing in the empty dining room, I whispered into the silence, "No more cover, no more silence. The day of reckoning is coming." And with those words, I felt something inside me harden into resolve. I would no longer wait for their contempt to pass. I would no longer allow Isabel to be blinded by their lies. Graham and his family wanted a battle over bricks and deeds. What they would face was far greater. The truth sharpened into judgment. The papers were signed, the decision made. I was not a victim. I was the storm they had invited into their lives. The cold air steadied me as I walked down the marble steps of the hall. The torn pieces of my gift still clutched in my memory like embers that refused to die. My heels struck the pavement with deliberate rhythm. Every sound inside the ballroom, every laugh, every glass clinking in triumph, was muffled by the thick glass doors, but I felt it pressing against me like smoke. Graham believed he had won. He believed I had been humiliated into silence. He would learn how wrong he was. Headlights cut through the darkness at the far end of the drive. The car moved fast, then slowed as it pulled up before me. Marcus Reed stepped out, his figure sharp under the street lamps. He carried his briefcase, heavy with the documents I had signed days earlier. His eyes searched mine, and I nodded once. No words of sympathy passed his lips. He knew I had no need for them. I opened the rear door and slid inside, Marcus following. The interior light flicked on, casting the papers in a pale glow as he placed the briefcase between us. I drew it closer, unlatched the brass clasps, and stared at the stack that held everything Graham thought he could claim. I whispered, my voice cold as steel, "Tonight, they'll meet the real me." Marcus's expression tightened. "Are you certain you want to reveal this now? The wedding will turn into chaos." I closed the case and set my hand firmly on top of it. "Chaos is already theirs, Marcus. I'm simply giving them the mirror they've been avoiding." He nodded once, settling back into his seat. The driver, his assistant, a man I trusted, kept silent, eyes on the road ahead. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. The folder was not just paper. It was my defense, my truth, my weapon. Every deed, every account statement, every revocation, proof that Graham and his family had no claim over me, no matter how loudly they demanded. They had thought the wedding was their stage. Tonight, the stage was mine. I leaned back and closed my eyes, letting the calmness wash over me. The storm inside had sharpened into resolve. Inside the ballroom, the celebration surged on. I could imagine the scene clearly, almost as if I were still standing among them. Graham would be in the center of his circle of friends, one hand gesturing with a glass of champagne, his smirk plastered across his face. He would retell the moment he tore my album apart as if it were a heroic act. "Old memories mean nothing," I could hear him boast. "What matters is securing the future, and soon that mansion will be mine. Isabel and I will finally live the life we deserve." The men around him would laugh, clinking their glasses, their eyes narrowing with greed of their own. Some would secretly resent him, jealous of his audacity. Others would envy the prize he believed he was about to seize. And Isabel, my daughter, would stand at his side, her smile stretched thin, her hands twisting nervously at the hem of her gown. She would not defend me, not openly, not yet, but she would feel the unease creeping into her bones, even if she could not name it. Graham would not notice. His voice would rise above the crowd, louder with every retelling. "You should have seen her face," he would say, mocking me before the same guests who once called themselves my friends. She thought a box of dusty photographs was a proper gift. What I need is her keys, and once she realizes she has no choice, she'll hand them over. It's only a matter of time. Laughter again, cruel and shallow. Glasses raised in false toasts. Phones lifted discreetly to record his arrogance. They did not realize they were documenting his undoing. Back in the car, I opened my eyes and met Marcus's steady gaze. "He's writing his own downfall right now," I said. Marcus replied with quiet certainty. "And you're about to read it aloud." I felt the car engine hum beneath us as the driver shifted gears. The night outside stretched wide and endless, but my focus was razor-sharp. Every step had led here, the insults, the demands, the humiliation. They thought I would bend, but they had only pushed me into clarity. I rested my hand on the briefcase again, the leather cool beneath my palm. "Tonight, Marcus," I whispered, "the masquerade ends." The suspense tightened around me like a wire pulled taut, humming with energy. Each second closer to my return was a second nearer to the reckoning, and as the car turned back toward the glowing lights of the hall, I allowed myself a single thought. Graham had torn my gift apart in front of 150 stunned guests, but he had no idea the gift I was about to give him. The ballroom doors loomed tall and heavy, the music and laughter pounding from the other side like a pulse. Marcus walked beside me, his briefcase clasped tight in his hand. When the doors swung open, the light flooded out, and 150 pairs of eyes turned toward me. The noise fell away in an instant, replaced by a silence so sharp I could feel it cut through the air. I stepped onto the marble floor with measured calm. My gown brushed softly against my shoes, my head held high. Every guest turned in their seat, cameras rising, whispers racing through the crowd. Graham stood at the head table, his champagne glass raised mid-sentence. His smirk faltered, then curled back into something colder. He slammed the glass onto the table and leaned forward, his voice carrying through the room. "You came back? What for? Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough? Spare us all and hand over the keys. No one wants to watch you cling to what's not yours." My eyes locked on his, unwavering. "I didn't return for keys, Graham. I returned for the truth. And tonight, everyone here will see it." The guests stirred, excitement flashing in their eyes. Phones angled higher. Isabel sat frozen, her knuckles white around her napkin. Elaine Dawson whispered furiously to her husband Douglas, their faces tightening like cords about to snap. Marcus stepped forward, placing the briefcase on the table with a deliberate thud. He clicked open the latches and began laying out the documents one by one. His voice was calm, steady, but it cut through the silence like steel. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "my name is Marcus Reed. I am Mrs. Clark's attorney, and I hold in my hand the revocations of every financial guarantee previously assumed in Graham Dawson's name. Effective immediately, Mrs. Clark no longer carries responsibility for the apartment lease Mr. Dawson has been enjoying without paying a cent. That lease is null and void. Null and—" A gasp rippled through the crowd. Graham's jaw tightened. "You're bluffing." Marcus ignored him, pulling another set of papers from the briefcase. Furthermore, the financial guarantees made under Mrs. Clark's accounts for tonight's wedding expenses have been rescinded. Every invoice, venue, catering, music has been reassigned to the Dawsons directly. Payment will no longer come from Mrs. Clark's estate. It is your debt now, Mr. Dawson. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests turned to each other, whispering fiercely, some laughing in disbelief. Several phones captured every word, their lights glowing like tiny spotlights. Graham shot to his feet, his voice cracking into fury. "This is insane! You can't just walk in here and—" I raised my hand, silencing him. "I can, and I did. For too long you have mocked me, demeaned me, treated me as if I were a relic you could discard. Tonight you revealed your hunger in front of everyone, tearing apart my gift because it did not pad your wallet. You thought humiliation would break me, but you only unmasked yourself." His face flushed crimson, sweat beading at his temples. He turned to Isabel, his voice sharp. "Say something. Tell her she can't do this." But Isabel's lips trembled, her eyes fixed on me with something between fear and dawning recognition. She said nothing. Douglas shoved his chair back, his booming voice trying to regain control. "This is nonsense. These papers mean nothing. You think one woman can ruin our family's plan?" Marcus's voice cut him down in an instant. "They are notarized, filed, and enforceable by law. Try to contest them, and you will only expose the financial frauds and debts your son has already stacked high above his head." Gasps again. Murmurs turned to pointed stares. Guests were no longer whispering with curiosity. They were whispering with judgment. I let the silence stretch, then spoke, my voice sharp and clear. "You thought tonight was your triumph. You thought I would walk away shamed. Instead, I stand here unbroken, and you are the ones trembling. You wanted my mansion. All you've bought is the truth and the bill for your lies." The ballroom held its breath. Graham's fists clenched, his lips moving without sound, his arrogance collapsing under the weight of the revelation. Elaine reached for Isabel's hand, but Isabel pulled it away. Her eyes shimmered with confusion, with hurt, with something she had buried too long. Guests rose from their seats, recording, whispering, feeding off the spectacle. Some laughed outright, others shook their heads. One man muttered loud enough for all to hear, "He's finished." I turned away from Graham, my steps calm, controlled. Behind me, the chaos swelled. Raised voices, protests, the snapping of cameras capturing his downfall. But I did not look back. The ballroom had erupted after Marcus's declaration. Voices clashed, chairs scraped, cameras flashed in every corner. But Marcus was not finished, and neither was I. He raised his hand, commanding silence with the kind of authority that did not need shouting. One by one, the murmurs died down until the entire hall was listening. He reached back into his briefcase and pulled out another folder, this one thicker, heavier, as if its contents carried the weight of years. His voice was calm, but the words struck like thunder. "For those of you who still believe this woman is clinging to scraps, let me make something clear. Mrs. Winona Clark is not the frail, penniless widow you have painted her to be. She is, and has been for decades, the sole owner of assets valued at more than $5 million. The room gasped as he unfolded each page. The mansion, fully paid, market value $3 million. 2 rental properties in the city, both under her name, producing steady income. And investment accounts diversified across funds, equities, and bonds, totaling over $2 million. A collective silence fell before the shock broke into scattered whispers. Guests leaned forward, some covering their mouths, others recording furiously. Graham's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. He slammed his hand against the table, the sound sharp enough to rattle glasses. "No, that's impossible. She lives like a hermit. She drives a car older than me. She cooks her own meals. She's nothing but a poor widow scraping by." I turned to him slowly, letting the silence hang long enough for his outburst to echo in the guests' minds. Then I spoke, each word deliberate. "You mistake simplicity for poverty, Graham. We chose a life of quiet. We chose to live modestly because we knew the dangers that come with flaunting wealth. I have survived decades without trouble. Yet trouble found me anyway, not from strangers, not from thieves, but from the very family that was supposed to protect my daughter." A wave of murmurs rolled across the hall, sharper now, edged with judgment. I caught eyes widening, mouths tightening in disapproval. Not at me, but at him. Douglas shifted uneasily in his chair, his bluster collapsing under the weight of Marcus's words. Elaine fanned herself with trembling hands, whispering frantically, "She's lying. She must be lying." Marcus cut her short. "These documents are certified, notarized, and verifiable in public record. Denial will not change facts. The truth is here for all to see." I stepped forward, my eyes fixed on Graham. You looked at me and saw weakness. You thought your mockery would push me into surrender, but every word you spat only revealed your desperation. This was never about Isabel. This was never about love. It was always about money. And tonight, in front of everyone, you are unmasked. Gasps echoed again. Guests turned their cameras toward Graham, capturing the rage twisting his features. He stammered, pointing at me with a trembling finger. She's been hiding this from all of you. She lied to us, pretended to be poor, tricked us into thinking she was nothing. Who lives like that unless they're scheming? I lifted my chin. Scheming? No. Protecting. Protecting myself. Protecting Isabel. Protecting what her father and I built with years of sacrifice. You saw restraint and called it weakness. You saw modesty and called it poverty. That is the measure of your character, Graham, not mine. The crowd erupted into quiet applause, hesitant at first, then stronger, swelling into a rhythm that filled the ballroom. Faces once skeptical now turned toward me with respect, admiration even. I saw guests nodding, whispering words like smart and dignity. Graham slammed his glass down so hard it shattered, shards scattering across the table. His voice cracked with rage. "This changes nothing. You'll hand me that mansion one way or another." I stared at him with steady calm. "The only thing I will hand you is the reality you cannot escape. You wanted me small. Tonight, you are the one exposed as small, desperate, and drowning in debt." The weight of my words settled over the hall like a storm cloud. Cameras flashed. Voices rose in a chorus of disbelief and condemnation, none of it directed at me. And in that moment, as I stood beneath the crystal chandeliers, I knew the tide had turned. The family that had mocked me, pressed me, humiliated me, had just been unmasked in front of every guest they had tried so hard to impress. The silence after Marcus's revelation was like a blade suspended in the air. All eyes in the ballroom were fixed on Graham, waiting for him to deny, to defend, to strike back. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came at first. The arrogance that had carried him through every insult, every calculated humiliation, had finally slipped. Then, with desperation clawing at his voice, he turned toward Isabel. He reached for her wrist, his tone softening in a way that felt almost rehearsed. "Isabel, please, don't listen to them. This is just a misunderstanding. You know me. You know I only ever wanted the best for us." Her hand trembled in his grasp, but she did not pull away immediately. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she looked at him, the man she had defended for 2 long years. But then her gaze shifted to me. She saw me standing tall, unbroken, the album he had torn lying still in shreds across the floor. The tears spilled over as her voice cracked. "A misunderstanding? What kind of misunderstanding makes you rip apart my mother's wedding gift in front of 150 guests? What kind of misunderstanding mocks the woman who raised me, who gave me everything, who stood by me when no one else did?" Her words struck like thunder. Guests gasped, some nodding, others whispering louder now, no longer cautious. Cameras tilted closer, catching every syllable. Graham's mask slipped further. He stammered, I lost my temper. I was under pressure. The wedding costs, the stress." But Isabel cut him off, her voice rising, heavy with betrayal. "No, Graham, you didn't lose your temper. You showed who you really are." Douglas and Elaine sat rigid, their faces pale. Douglas's jaw worked as if he wanted to speak, but no words formed. Elaine pressed a napkin to her lips, her eyes darting around the room, scanning for escape, for sympathy, for anything that might salvage their crumbling image. None came. One guest whispered loudly enough to be heard, "How could he treat his own mother-in-law like that?" Another muttered, "Shameful. Absolutely shameful." The chorus grew, rippling through the crowd, until the ballroom buzzed with open judgment. I remained silent, letting the weight of the room press down on him. Sometimes silence delivers a deeper blow than any words. Graham dropped to his knees beside Isabel, clutching at her gown. His voice cracked, now stripped of charm. "Please, don't turn against me. I can fix this. I'll make it right. Just stand by me, Isabel. I need you." She pulled her hand free, stepping back as tears streamed down her face. "No, Graham, you never needed me. You needed my mother's house. You needed her money. You needed everything but me." Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her hands to her face. The sound of her sobs filled the hall, a sound that cut deeper than any legal document could. Douglas finally rose, his face dark with shame. "Enough," he muttered, his voice low. "You've dragged us all into ruin." He could not meet my eyes. He could not meet anyone's eyes. Elaine stood too, tugging at his sleeve, her lips tight, her face ashen. For once, their arrogance was gone. What remained was only disgrace. Around us, the tide had shifted completely. Guests no longer whispered, they spoke openly. "He's finished. Imagine marrying into that mess. She deserves so much better." And through it all, Graham sat crumpled on the floor, his hand stretched toward Isabel, his face streaked with sweat. The man who had once strutted through every room, certain the world owed him everything, was now nothing but a spectacle. I took a step forward, my voice sharp but calm. "This is the face of greed when it is unmasked. You thought wealth could be stolen, that dignity could be torn apart like paper. But wealth, built on lies, collapses, and dignity cannot be destroyed by hands like yours." The hall erupted, not with chaos this time, but with applause. Scattered at first, then louder, until the sound filled every corner. It was not for me alone. It was for truth. It was for the satisfaction of seeing arrogance finally pay its price. Graham's shoulders slumped, his hands falling uselessly to his knees. He had no words left. His downfall was complete, witnessed by every guest, recorded by dozens of cameras. His name would not leave this hall untarnished. It would follow him, whispered with scorn wherever he went. A week after the wedding, the dust had not yet settled, but I could already feel the shift in the air. Guests had whispered, videos had circulated, and Graham's arrogance had collapsed in front of 150 witnesses. By all rights, he should have disappeared into shame. But men like Graham do not retreat quietly. They claw, they plot, they poison what they cannot possess. I first heard it in the market, whispered behind my back by women I had known for years. "Poor Winona," one of them said, her voice low, but not low enough. "I heard she's losing her mind. Isabel's husband says she can't manage her finances anymore. Imagine, a woman her age still trying to run her life." I stopped mid-step, the fruit basket heavy in my hands. The words sliced deeper than any insult Graham had thrown directly at me. This was not mockery in a ballroom. This was slander spilling into the streets, poisoning the air around my name. That evening Marcus came to my home, his face set like stone, a stack of papers under his arm. He placed them on my dining table and spoke with quiet fury. "He's filed a petition, Winona. Graham Dawson has formally requested that the court order a competency evaluation. He claims you are mentally unstable and incapable of managing your own estate. If the court rules in his favor, he could be appointed as guardian over your assets." The words hung between us, heavy as chains. For a moment, I felt the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest, not just his cruelty, but Isabel's silence. Did she believe him? Was she standing by while he dragged me into this war? I closed my eyes, steadying myself. The fury in me did not burn wild. It burned cold, precise. "So this is his plan B," I said quietly. "He failed to humiliate me in front of a crowd, so now he seeks to strip me in court. If he wants a war, Marcus, then he will meet the truth, and the truth does not lose." Marcus leaned forward, his voice sharp. "We will fight this. I'll assemble medical testimony, financial records, witnesses, everything that shows you are more than capable, but you must prepare yourself. He is desperate, and desperation is dangerous." I nodded, my resolve hardening. Desperation is all he has left, and that will undo him faster than anything I could do. The following days were a blur of whispers and stares. Neighbors looked at me differently, pity in their eyes. Some avoided me entirely. I saw my reflection in their faces, not who I was, but who Graham painted me to be. A fragile old woman clinging to a house too big, money she could not manage, memories she could not release. He wanted to reduce me to a caricature. But every morning, I rose with sharper purpose. I opened my safe, pulled out bank statements, property contracts, letters from tenants who had rented my apartments without a single issue in decades. Evidence, proof, weapons. I cataloged every document, lined them in order, prepared them as if I were sharpening blades. One night, I sat with Marcus in his office, the lamplight casting long shadows across his shelves. He slid a new document toward me. "This is his sworn affidavit. Read it carefully." I scanned the pages, my jaw tightening with each line. Mrs. Clark displays erratic behavior, refuses logical financial planning, unable to discern reality from sentiment. Her recent public outburst at a family event demonstrates instability. I set the papers down, my voice flat. He calls truth an outburst. He calls dignity delusion, and he expects a judge to believe this. Marcus tapped the edge of the affidavit. "He underestimates you, he underestimates me, and he underestimates the law. We will not only disprove this, Winona, we will expose the motive behind it, his debt, his fraud, his hunger. The court will see him for what he is." I looked at him, my lips curling into a thin, cold smile. "Then let him try. Let him drag me before the world. Every step he takes will lead him deeper into the pit he dug himself." The air in the room crackled with tension, but not fear. This was not a retreat. This was the sharpening of swords before battle. The next morning, I stood on my balcony, the city stirring awake below me. I held Graham's affidavit in my hand, the words meant to destroy me. Instead, they felt like fuel. He wanted me painted unstable, but all he had done was reveal his terror. Only a man drowning in his own lies would grasp so wildly at the throat of someone who had already beaten him once. I whispered to myself, steady and cold, "If he wants to fight me in court, he will face not an old woman, but the truth he fears most." And with that, I folded the affidavit, placed it atop the growing stack of evidence, and locked it in my case. The second battle had begun, and this time it would not end with whispers in a ballroom. It would end with judgment from a court, where every lie would be carved open for all to see. The world has a way of magnifying the truth when the truth is undeniable. A week after Graham filed his petition to declare me unfit, I began noticing something strange. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications, messages from old acquaintances, even strangers. At first, I ignored them, but then Marcus called, his voice carrying a restrained excitement. "Winona, you should see this. The videos from the wedding. They've gone viral." I frowned. "Viral? What do you mean?" "Millions of views across TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. The moment Graham tore up your gift and demanded the mansion keys, it's everywhere. People are outraged. They're on your side." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, heart pounding as I scrolled through clip after clip. Different angles, shaky phone recordings, captions blazing across the screen. "Son-in-law humiliates mother-in-law at her daughter's wedding." And another read, "All she gave was a handmade album and he demanded her mansion keys." I pressed play, and there I was on screen, calm, quiet, holding the shredded remains of my wooden gift box while Graham sneered at me before a stunned audience. The comments scrolled endlessly. "Respect to this grandma." "Never betray your mom like this. Shame on him." "Imagine tearing a family gift just for greed. Disgusting." I sat back, overwhelmed, a flood of emotions pressing against my chest. For so long, I had carried this fight in silence, shouldering the cruelty alone. Now, strangers from every corner of the country were speaking for me. It felt like a wave lifting me, pushing back against the lies Graham had tried to spread. The next morning I walked to the market, expecting the same whispers of pity. Instead, people approached me directly. A young woman with a child in her arms stopped me. "Are you the lady from the video? I just want to say, you're an inspiration. My mom lives with me, and I promised myself I'll never treat her the way that man treated you." An older man nodded as he passed, tipping his hat. You show dignity, ma'am. Don't let him take that from you." For the first time in weeks, I felt the sharp weight in my chest loosen. Graham had wanted to bury me in humiliation, but he had given me something else entirely, a platform. Marcus saw the shift too. When he visited, he held up his phone with a half smile. "Do you realize you've become a symbol? Hashtags are trending. Hashtag respect. Winona, #grandma strong. Advocacy groups for elder rights are picking up your story. You're more than a case now, you're a cause." I exhaled slowly, steady but firm. Then let it be so. If my humiliation can open eyes, let them see. If my silence has been my prison, then let my voice be the key. But it was more than voice. It was community. Messages poured in, letters, emails, even packages left at my door. A handmade quilt from a woman in Ohio with a note. "You remind me of my grandmother. She raised me alone. Please don't let them silence you." A check from a stranger in Texas. "For your legal defense, people like him should never win." I didn't need their money. My finances were intact, but the gesture pierced through my solitude. I was no longer just Winona Clark, the widow Graham mocked. I was standing for countless mothers and grandmothers who had been dismissed, belittled, and pushed aside by those who claimed to love them. One night, I turned on the TV and saw my own face on the news. The anchor's voice was sharp. The viral video sparking national outrage, a wealthy widow humiliated by her son-in-law on her daughter's wedding day. Experts say it raises urgent questions about elder abuse and financial exploitation within families. The camera cut to footage of Graham, his smug face sneering at the wedding. Then back to me, quietly holding the broken pieces of my gift. They called it a symbol. They called me resilient. But to me, it was simply truth. Finally visible, finally undeniable. Isabel called that evening. Her voice shook. "Mom, it's everywhere. People at my work saw the videos. They keep asking me how I could let Graham talk to you like that. I don't know what to say anymore." I paused, then spoke evenly. "You don't need to say anything, Isabel. The truth is speaking for itself. But you do need to listen. Ask yourself why the world sees him so clearly, and you cannot." She was silent for a long time before whispering, "Maybe I was afraid of seeing it." Her words cut deep, but they were a beginning. For her, for me, for everyone who had watched and judged. By the end of the week, advocacy groups reached out. They wanted me to speak, to share my story, to help pass stronger protections for elders whose families turned predatory. At first, I hesitated. My life had always been private, quiet. But then I thought of every woman in those comment sections, every son or daughter who wrote, "I will never treat my mother this way." If my pain could prevent theirs, then it was worth it. I looked at Marcus across the table. He tried to make me look powerless. Instead, he gave me the loudest voice I've ever had. Let's use it. The fight in court was still ahead. Graham's lies had not yet been silenced. But in the court of public opinion, his defeat had already begun. And I felt a power stronger than anger rising in me. Hope. The kind that builds when you realize you are not alone, that the world can be cruel, but it can also be just. As I closed my laptop that night, I whispered into the quiet, "Respect to this grandma indeed, and to every grandmother who refuses to bow to greed." The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. My hands rested calmly on the oak table in front of me, documents stacked neatly beside Marcus. For weeks we had prepared for this moment. Graham sat across the aisle, his face pale but defiant. Elaine clutching her purse, Douglas staring at the floor as if the grain there would save him. Isabel was present too, though her eyes never quite met mine. The judge entered, and the courtroom stilled. My pulse beat steady. I had faced worse storms in silence. This was only the moment where truth would be spoken aloud. The hearing dragged with arguments and motions, Graham's lawyer spinning tales of my fragility, my supposed emotional instability. Each word was a dagger disguised as concern. They played the video from the wedding, trying to cast my quiet departure as erratic. But then Marcus stood, his voice sharp as glass. "Your Honor, the video shows restraint, not instability." "Mrs." Clark did not scream, did not retaliate. She walked away from humiliation with dignity. "That is not incompetence, that is strength." He laid out the records, my consistent investment returns, rental agreements signed and honored, bills paid on time, charitable donations traced to the last cent. Then came the medical testimony, a doctor confirming my health, my clarity of mind. Graham squirmed in his seat, his face reddening as each fact stripped another layer from his lies. Finally, the judge leaned forward, her voice even but unyielding. "After careful review, the court finds no evidence that Mrs. Winona Clark lacks capacity to manage her affairs. The petition is hereby denied. Furthermore, the court cautions Mr. Graham Dawson against any further attempts to misrepresent facts or manipulate legal processes for personal gain." The gavel struck once, and in that instant, the chains Graham tried to bind me with shattered. I glanced at him. His head dropped into his hands, the picture of a man cornered by his own schemes. Isabel rose quietly, her chair scraping the floor. She whispered, "I can't do this anymore," and walked out without looking back at him. Douglas and Elaine remained, faces pale, their bodies slumped as if years of pretense had finally collapsed. Later, I would hear that the debts Douglas had hidden for decades came due. Without Graham's promised access to my estate, they were forced to sell their home, their accounts drained until nothing was left but regret. As for Graham, his employer, already suspicious of missing funds, terminated him within days. Lawsuits followed, civil claims from those he had defrauded. The mansion keys he once demanded slipped forever from his grasp, replaced by court summonses and locked doors. But I did not dwell on their ruin. My life had never been about revenge, though justice had found its course. What mattered was what came next. I sat in Marcus's office, signing papers not to fortify my walls, but to open doors. "The Clark Foundation," I said aloud, the name settling into the air. "It will serve elders who are silenced, mocked, or exploited by their families. No one should endure what I endured alone." Marcus nodded, his smile touched with pride. "You turned humiliation into power. That's legacy, Winona." Word spread quickly. Advocacy groups aligned with me, volunteers offered their time, and letters arrived from across the country. One from a woman in Michigan read, "Because of you, I found the courage to stand up to my son when he tried to take my savings. Thank you for giving me strength." Standing on that foundation's opening day, I looked at the faces gathered, young and old, men and women, each with their own scars. And I understood. Graham had sought to strip me of dignity, but instead, he had handed me a voice that echoed far beyond my own story. That night, as I walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, I reflected on the path that had brought me here. Pain, betrayal, slander, all of it had led to this quiet triumph. Not just for me, but for every grandmother, every parent who deserved respect. Justice had spoken in court, but compassion would carry the verdict further than any gavel could. 2 years have passed since that night when everything collapsed and everything began. I wake now to the sound of birds brushing the air above the garden, the sunlight spilling across the mansion walls that once felt like a burden and now feel like a sanctuary. My hands tend to the roses, their thorns sharp, but their bloom unapologetically alive. I keep a journal close by on the porch table, leather-worn, pages filled with reflections that only time could have taught me. On the first page of this morning's entry, I wrote the words that have lived inside me since the court ruling. Sometimes, to save a family, you must be willing to lose it. I underlined the sentence once, not as a wound, but as a truth. Joseph, my neighbor for 30 years, walked across the lawn with a basket of fresh bread and a smile as steady as his friendship. He set it down on the table and said, "Your roses look stronger every year, Winona, like their keeper." I laughed softly. "They learned from me, Joseph. You prune, you endure the storms, and eventually They bloom brighter than before. We shared coffee, the morning quiet and unhurried. In the distance, the mansion's windows glimmered. It stood not as a trophy, not as a fortress, but as a witness to what greed tried to take and what resolve had kept whole. Later that afternoon, a familiar sound stirred me, the crunch of tires on the gravel drive. My heart tightened before I even looked up. Isabel stepped out of her car, her posture hesitant, her eyes wide with the weight of years unspoken. She walked toward me slowly, carrying no gifts, no excuses, only herself. And when she reached me, her composure broke. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." For a moment, silence carried between us, the silence of wounds, of questions without answers, of love tested and nearly lost. Then I reached out, pulled her into my arms, and held her as if time itself could be gathered back. I whispered into her hair, "We build family on respect, not greed." She shook as she cried, her voice breaking. "I let him blind me. I let his words become mine. I should have defended you." I pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, my own steady. "The past cannot be changed, Isabel, but it can be learned from. That is all I ask, that you learn, that you never repeat what you saw." Her hands gripped mine, desperate. "I don't want to lose you again." I squeezed her fingers. "Then don't. Respect keeps us together, nothing else." We sat in the garden as the sun bent low, speaking not of Graham, not of trials, not of ruin, but of childhood memories, of recipes we had forgotten, of laughter that felt fragile yet real. In her face, I saw the daughter I had raised, not the woman manipulated, but the girl who once held my hand at school gates, who once trusted me to guide her. Inside, the journal waited, its pages ready for tonight's entry. I already knew the words I would write. Forgiveness does not excuse the past, it releases the present. As twilight settled, Joseph returned with candles, setting them on the porch railing. The three of us shared bread and soup, a simple meal, no grandeur, no performance. It was enough. Isabel leaned against my shoulder, whispering, "Thank you for not closing the door on me." I kissed the top of her head. Doors can be closed to greed, Isabel, but never to repentance. That night, when the house was quiet and the candles burned low, I stood at the window of my study and looked out over the garden. 2 years ago, I had walked away from a ballroom with shredded wood in my hands and laughter at my back. Tonight, I stood here with peace in my chest and hope in my home. I closed the journal after writing my final line for the day. Strength is not in what we hold, but in what we release. And sometimes, the greatest victory is quiet. Then I turned off the lamp, let the mansion rest, and let myself rest with it.